The Birth of a Dream 1919, W.O. Bentley's fight against time, war, and silence. In the early days of the 20th century, long before supercars and luxury showrooms, before roaring racetracks and royal buyers, there was only a man and a dream. That man was Walter Owen Bentley, known to the world as W.O. Bentley. But to those who truly knew him, he was far more than a name. He was a visionary, a man born not just with the hands of an engineer but with the heart of an artist. And his story, the foundation of Bentley Motors, was written not in boardrooms, but in oil-stained hands, wartime tragedy, and the lonely cry of ambition that most people never hear. The man before the machines. W.O. Bentley was born in 1888 in Hampstead, London, one of 9 children. His early life wasn't one of glamour or fortune. He wasn't born into wealth or inheritance. His fascination with machines began not with cars, but with railways. As a young boy, he watched steam trains rumble by, mesmerized by their power, their noise, and the iron will they represented. But Bentley wasn't content just watching. At just 16 years old, he took an apprenticeship with the Great Northern Railway, shoveling coal, working long hours, and earning a meager wage. While other boys played or pursued leisure, W.O. was in the dirt, learning the soul of machines. He believed that to truly build something great, you had to understand it not from the top, but from the ground. Later, he studied engineering at King's College London, and it wasn't long before his obsession shifted from trains to automobiles, a young industry, wild and untamed. It was the perfect playground for someone like Bentley, and that's where his dream truly began. From aluminum pistons to a war-torn world. In the early 1910s, Bentley began experimenting with engine designs. He was obsessed with performance, speed, strength. He believed cars could do more, that they could be faster, more durable, and most importantly, alive. His breakthrough came with a revolutionary idea to build pistons from aluminum rather than traditional cast. This reduced engine weight and allowed for higher speeds, something that would later change not just car racing, but aviation itself. Then, the world changed. In 1914, World War I erupted, dragging Europe into bloodshed. The very streets Bentley once walked in London were filled with marching boots, bomb sirens, and cries of farewell. Britain needed power, not on the ground, but in the skies. Bentley answered. His lightweight aluminum piston design was quickly adapted into aircraft engines. The Bentley BO1 and BO2 rotary engines powered some of Britain's most critical fighter planes, including the Sopwith Camel, which helped change the course of air combat. But Bentley paid a personal price. He watched young pilots, some barely older than schoolboys, soar into battle with engines he helped design, only to fall from the sky in flames. Though he saved countless lives through his engineering, the war haunted him. He often wondered, did I help them fly, or help them die faster? The war gave Bentley fame, but it also carved sorrow into his soul. 1919, a new war begins. When the war finally ended in 1918, Britain was a broken nation, cities lay in rubble, families were torn, and men like Bentley returned home not as heroes, but as ghosts of who they were. But even in the ashes, W.O. Bentley wasn't done dreaming. While others tried to rebuild their lives quietly, Bentley was already planning his next revolution, not in warplanes, but on the road. In 1919, just months after the armistice, Bentley founded Bentley Motors Limited in a modest workshop in Cricklewood, North London. There was no money, no huge factory, no government support. There was only one man's burning belief that he could build a fast car, a good car, the best in its class. He poured everything he had into it. His war pensions, his savings, even his health. He worked day and night, barely sleeping, often skipping meals. Friends worried, family warned him. But W.O. couldn't stop, not now. He had seen death. He had seen men fall from the skies. Now he wanted to build something that would outlive him. The first car, the silent roar of hope. In late 1919, Bentley unveiled his first creation, the Bentley 3-litre. It wasn't just a car, it was a resurrection. It had a 3.0-litre engine with overhead camshaft and 4 valves per cylinder, technology far ahead of its time. It looked bold, dignified, it didn't whisper luxury, it shouted engineering. The first customers were mostly wealthy young men, eager to recapture the speed and thrill they missed during the war. Bentley gave them what they wanted, a car that roared like a Spitfire and moved like a bullet. But for Bentley, It was never about money or fame. He once told a friend, "I don't care if I die penniless, I just want to build something that makes the world stand still when it hears the engine." That was Bentley, a man who didn't chase wealth, he chased immortality through design. The tragic seed was already planted, long before anyone noticed. While the world looked on in awe as Bentley Motors roared to life in 1919, few could see the cracks forming beneath the surface. They applauded the power, the elegance, the sheer engineering brilliance of W.O. Bentley's creations. They marveled at the way his cars seemed to breathe, not just run, how they tore across roads with a mix of fury and grace. But while the public saw strength underneath, Bentley Motors was quietly bleeding. Walter Owen Bentley was a man driven by passion, not profit. His heart beat for craftsmanship, not capitalism. He didn't think in ledgers or margins, he thought in revolutions per minute, torque ratios, engine weight, and aerodynamic curves. While other car makers of the time were building businesses, W.O. Bentley was building a legacy. He wasn't interested in building cars, he wanted to build masterpieces, mechanical expressions of freedom and British pride. That was the fatal difference. That was the seed. He poured every ounce of himself into the Bentley 3-litre. It was stunning, revolutionary, but it was expensive to build, slow to manufacture, and demanded absolute perfection. W.O. would reject entire batches of parts if a single piece didn't meet his impossible standards. He believed that compromise was a betrayal to his vision, to his customers, and to the memory of the young men he had watched die in the war, many of them powered by engines he helped create. To W.O., every car he built had to matter. It had to be worthy of their sacrifice, but that kind of idealism has a price. And the world, cruel and relentless, was not prepared to wait for a perfectionist with an empty wallet. Behind the closed doors of Bentley Motors, the problems began quietly. They were whispered in meeting rooms, muttered in accountants' offices, noted in red ink across quarterly reports. Costs were too high. Production was too slow. Profits were dangerously thin, if they existed at all. Bentley was an engineering genius, yes, but he wasn't a businessman. He had no taste for financial negotiation, no patience for marketing or investment politics. He ignored the warnings, brushed off the advice. He believed that if he just made the best cars in the world, everything else would fall into place. That was his faith. That was his flaw. The world had changed after the war. Britain was battered. The economy was unstable. The wealthy were fewer, and even they were cautious. Mass production was on the rise. Efficiency was the new religion. Henry Ford had shown the world what could be achieved through standardization and scale, but W.O. Bentley refused to follow. He refused to rush. He refused to cheapen what he built. He looked at mass market production and saw soullessness. He looked at balance sheets and saw distractions. And so, brick by brick, his dream stood tall but hollow. Investors began to worry. The press began to question. Rival companies started gaining ground. Rolls-Royce was growing. Other brands were adapting, innovating, and, most importantly, surviving. Meanwhile, Bentley clung to his vision. Even as the storm clouds gathered, the more the world shifted towards speed and profits, the more W.O. doubled down on quality and pride. He believed it was a moral stance. But the market does not reward morality, it rewards momentum. He would spend long hours alone in the workshop, sleeves rolled up, hands greasy, poring over designs, fixing imperfections no customer would ever notice. He'd snap at staff who suggested cutting corners. He'd dismiss financiers who warned about bankruptcy. They didn't understand. He thought they weren't building a dream. They were counting pennies while he was trying to write history in steel and rubber. But in truth, Bentley Motors wasn't just failing to make profit, it was drowning in its pursuit of perfection. Behind the scenes, creditors grew impatient, suppliers became wary, payrolls were late, production delays piled up. And all the while, the Bentley name was becoming more famous than ever. Ironically, just as the world began to recognize the brilliance of his work, the walls of his empire began to collapse inward. Every car that left the factory was a miracle, but also a burden. Every order fulfilled meant more debt, more pressure, more ticking time. W.O. was not blind to the danger deep down. He knew. He could feel it in the silence of the office, in the tightening of his chest, in the way his engineers avoided eye contact when budgets were mentioned. But he kept going, not because he thought he could still save it, but because he didn't know how to stop. The factory was his cathedral. The sound of engines was his church bell. He wasn't building cars anymore. He was holding on to a part of himself that the war hadn't already taken. And still, the outside world cheered. Bentley won races. Customers praised the unmatched driving experience. The aristocrats and elite lined up to own one. It was all a beautiful illusion. A powerful, roaring illusion made of chrome and silence. Because behind the curtain, the numbers didn't lie. Bentley Motors was dying slowly, tragically, and no one could see it. That's the true sorrow of it all. The world watched a man create brilliance, yet no one helped him sustain it. They marveled at the speed, but not at the sacrifice. They wanted the Bentley name, but not the burden that came with it. And W.O. Bentley, the proud, stubborn dreamer that he was, refused to beg, refused to bend, and refused to dilute his legacy for the sake of survival. The tragic seed was already planted, and it was growing in silence. No one noticed, no one stopped it, not even W.O. Bentley himself. Because the saddest truth in all of this was that he didn't just build a car company, he built a monument to his own heartbreak. A roaring, shining, heartbreaking machine, and soon, it would all come crashing down. Chapter 2, Racing into Glory. 1920s. The 1920s were an era of roaring engines and roaring egos. Across Europe and the United States, a new class of men was being born, not from royalty or politics, but from the thrill of speed and the scream of tires on tarmac. The First World War had taken so much. It had leveled cities, buried millions, and broken the world's heart. But in the aftermath, something unexpected happened. The survivors craved movement. They craved excitement. They craved escape, and into that hunger, into that wild new decade known as the Roaring Twenties, W.O. Bentley stepped forward with machines that didn't just move people, they moved souls. By 1921, Bentley Motors was starting to gain the kind of attention most carmakers only dreamed of. The Bentley 3-litre, W.O.'s firstborn beast, wasn't just a car, it was a statement, a declaration of engineering dominance. Where other luxury cars glided softly down the street, Bentleys charged forward. They didn't purr, they growled. And in a world where performance was becoming the new language of prestige, this mattered. W.O. Bentley didn't set out to dominate motorsport. He wasn't chasing trophies or fame, but racing became unavoidable, not because of ambition, but because of necessity. If Bentley Motors was going to survive the tidal wave of competition rising from Europe, from Bugatti, from Alfa Romeo, from Mercedes-Benz, it had to do more than just be luxurious. It had to prove itself, and racing was the ultimate battlefield. In 1922, Bentley took a bold step. They entered the International Tourist Trophy race on the Isle of Man. It was a brutal, unforgiving test of machinery and endurance. The roads were narrow, the terrain uneven, and the expectations sky-high. Bentley didn't win that year, but they impressed. More importantly, they finished. And for a company still hanging on by financial threads, finishing was a quiet form of triumph. But the true transformation came in 1923, the year W.O. Bentley reluctantly agreed to enter his car into a strange, unknown race in France. A new event, a 24-hour race that tested not just speed, but stamina. It was called the 24 Hours of Le Mans. At first, W.A. was skeptical. What's the point of driving a car around in circles for a whole day? He allegedly grumbled, but his team convinced him. And so, Bentley entered Le Mans for the first time. That first year, Bentley didn't win, but they came fourth, with only one car. That single 3-litre Bentley held its own against teams with more money, more experience, and more resources. It was the beginning of something far greater than a race. It was the spark of mythology. By 1924, Bentley returned to Le Mans. This time, they didn't just compete, they conquered. Driver John Duff and Frank Clement took the 3-litre Bentley all the way, winning the grueling 24-hour race and cementing Bentley's name in racing history. The news exploded across Britain. Bentley wasn't just a builder of fine cars anymore, it was the fastest, toughest, and most glorious British car brand on the international stage. But with glory came attention, with attention came expectations. And with expectations came pressure, the kind that quietly chokes from the inside out. W.O. Bentley was proud. He should have been. But even in the face of victory, he was deeply uneasy. Racing cost money, a lot of it, and Bentley Motors was still bleeding. The company was winning races, winning headlines, winning hearts, but losing in the one place that truly mattered, the bank account. From 1925 to 1927, Bentley's reputation soared. They returned to Le Mans again and again. They began attracting a new type of customer, men with money, youth, and a thirst for danger. They were called the Bentley Boys, wealthy, flamboyant British aristocrats who loved fast living and faster cars. They weren't just drivers, they were celebrities. People like Wolf Barnotto, Sir Henry Tim Birkin, and Glenn Kidston didn't just drive Bentleys, they embodied them. Cocky, courageous, charismatic, the Bentley Boys raced hard, drank harder, and lived like gods. In 1927, Bentley won Le Mans again, but not without drama. During the race, one of the lead Bentleys crashed violently. Another was delayed. It seemed like all hope was lost. But through sheer grit and unbreakable machinery, a battered Bentley managed to claw its way back from disaster and still win. It was a miracle, it was madness, it was the stuff of legend. The kind of story that made Bentley more than a brand, it made it a symbol of British endurance. And yet, beneath the roar of the crowds and the glittering champagne celebrations, Bentley Motors was falling apart. Every victory came with a price. More racing meant more spending. More spending meant more debt. W.O.Bentley refused to compromise on materials or design. His racing cars were handcrafted with the same obsessive care as his road models. There were no shortcuts, no cost-cutting, no mass production. Just brilliance, slow, expensive brilliance. In 1928, Bentley introduced the monstrous 6.5-litre Speed 6, a thunderous machine that made headlines across the world. It was beautiful, it was terrifying, it won Le Mans in 1929, and then again in 1930, back-to-back victories, a legacy written in gasoline and sweat. No one could match Bentley on the track, not even Bugatti. Ettore Bugatti famously insulted Bentley's machines as the fastest lorries in the world, mocking their size and power. But he wasn't laughing after the Speed 6 blew past his fragile races. By 1930, Bentley had won Le Mans 5 times in 7 years. No other brand had ever done that. The world saw a company flying high, a titan of luxury and speed. But behind the scenes, W.O.Bentley was suffocating under the weight of his dream. Sales were dwindling, the Great Depression had begun. The wealthy elite were disappearing, even the Bentley boys were running out of money. W.O. had built the most dominant racing legacy of the era. He had etched his name into motorsport history. But he had also chained his company to a strategy that could not survive the shifting economic winds. People no longer wanted roaring monsters, they wanted practical cars. Affordable cars, quiet, efficient, reliable cars. And Bentley refused to play that game. The tragedy of the 1920s wasn't that Bentley failed. It's that it succeeded too brilliantly, too quickly, without the foundation to sustain it. Every Le Mans trophy was a golden nail in a beautiful coffin. The more Bentley proved its dominance, the more it drained its resources. The more W.O. clung to his vision, the more isolated he became. And by the end of 1930, as the champagne dried on the Le Mans trophy, and the Bentley boys faded into memory, the company was on the verge of collapse. Racing had brought glory, but glory doesn't pay debts. And soon, W.O.Bentley would face the hardest truth of all. Victory cannot save a dream that is drowning in reality. Chapter 3. Crashing into Reality 1929-1931. The final years of W.O.Bentley's reign were not marked by explosions or dramatic endings. No, the end came like a slow leak, silent, invisible at first, and then impossible to ignore. From 1929 to 1931, Bentley Motors was not just a company in trouble, it was a dream bleeding out in slow motion. The year was 1929, and on the surface, everything seemed golden. Bentley had just secured its 4th Le Mans win. The mighty 6.5-litre Speed 6, piloted by the indomitable Wolf Barnotto and Sir Henry Tim Birkin, had dominated the field. Newspapers hailed Bentley as the unchallenged champion of endurance racing. Britain celebrated W.O.Bentley as a hero of engineering. The Bentley boys were living gods, roaring across Europe in their hand-built monsters. And for a fleeting moment, W.O. allowed himself to believe it was all finally working. But deep down, he knew the numbers didn't lie. Behind the glamour of champagne-soaked victories and roaring engines, Bentley Motors was losing money, fast. Sales were soft, production was expensive. And the company, already running on fumes, was desperately in need of a financial miracle. The truth was bitter. The people who bought Bentleys in the 1920s were a dying breed, quite literally in some cases. The aristocrats, who once treated Bentleys as toys, had been ruined by economic downturns or distracted by other luxuries. The market was shrinking, the bills were stacking, and the company's foundation was beginning to crack under the pressure of its own ambition. Then came October 1929. The world shifted on its axis. The New York Stock Exchange collapsed. The Great Depression began. What had already been a fragile economy now turned into a graveyard for businesses everywhere. Fortune crumbled, banks failed, even giants fell, and in that terrifying silence after the crash, luxury died. No one, not even the wealthy, wanted fast, flamboyant cars anymore. They wanted security, they wanted savings, they wanted to survive. And survival was something Bentley Motors could no longer guarantee. Throughout 1930, Bentley scrambled. W.O. tried to stay afloat the only way he knew how, by pushing engineering forward. That year, Bentley released the 8-litre, the most luxurious, most powerful Bentley ever made. It was stunning, a silent bullet wrapped in elegance. A masterpiece of precision. W.O. called it the best car I ever made, and he meant it. It was smooth, it was fierce, it was enormous. The 8-litre could cruise at over 100 miles per hour in an era where most cars rattled at half that speed. It was Bentley's response to Rolls-Royce's Phantom, not just an answer, but a challenge. But it was also Bentley's final gamble, and it would prove fatal. The 8-litre was expensive, too expensive. At a time when even the richest customers were hesitating, Bentley had launched the costliest car in its history. Only 100 units were ever made. It was a car for kings in a world of beggars. As beautiful as it was, the market had no room for such excess anymore. By mid-1930, Bentley Motors was in crisis. The race wins meant nothing to creditors. The trophies gathered dust while the unpaid bills stacked higher. The Bentley boys had all but disappeared, some broken by the Depression, some simply moving on. And W.O. Bentley found himself trapped in a tragic paradox. A man at the top of the automotive world, yet losing control of everything he built. In private, W.O. was increasingly disillusioned. He had built a company out of passion, not profit. But now, it was clear, passion was not enough. Glory did not pay salaries. Precision engineering did not keep the lights on. He was exhausted, spiritually and financially. And worst of all, the board had begun ignoring him. They respected the name. They respected the legend. But the business needed a savior, not a dreamer. Bentley, once hailed as the father of British motor engineering, was now seen as a burden. The banks circled, creditors grew louder. And Bentley Motors, the same company that had once outshined Bugatti, Mercedes, and Alfa Romeo, now teetered on the edge of collapse. By the end of 1930, W.O. could feel it, the inevitable was coming. Then, in 1931, the final blow arrived, not as a bombshell, but as a rescue. A mysterious company stepped forward, offering to buy Bentley Motors and keep it afloat. W.O., weary and out of options, agreed. He signed away his company, believing it had been saved by a group of British investors. But in the shadows, behind shell companies and deceptive names, the truth emerged. The beer was Rolls-Royce. Bentley had fallen into the hands of its greatest rival. It was the most bitter twist of fate imaginable. W.O. Bentley, the man who had built his life to out-engineer and outrace Rolls-Royce, had unknowingly sold his soul to them. And they hadn't bought Bentley to revive it. They bought it to silence it. Rolls-Royce didn't want competition. They wanted control. They took Bentley's name, its heritage, and its shell, and then erased W.O. from the company that bore his name. He was quietly dismissed in the most humiliating way possible. The founder of Bentley was no longer welcome at Bentley Motors. And just like that, the dream was over.